The chill of the evening clung to Emma Carter's uniform as she stepped out of the cab and onto the quiet street. After nearly a year overseas, the sight of her childhood home should have felt comforting, but instead, it looked strangely lifeless. The porch swing was still, the curtains drawn tight, and even the wind chimes hung in silence as if the house itself had stopped breathing. She climbed the front steps and knocked, half expecting her mother's familiar voice or her sister's laughter echoing from inside. Nothing. She tried again, harder this time. Still no answer. When she reached for the door handle, she found it locked. Emma frowned. Her family had always kept the house open for her, especially when she was returning from deployment. Stepping back onto the sidewalk, she scanned the dark windows, a knot tightening in her chest. Something was wrong. The house didn't just feel empty, it felt abandoned. For the first time since leaving the base, Emma felt the sharp edge of unease. This wasn't the homecoming she had imagined during countless sleepless nights abroad. Instead of warmth and reunion, she was greeted only by silence. Emma was debating whether to circle around back and try a window when a familiar voice carried across the street. "Emma Carter, is that really you?" She turned to see Mrs. Landers, the neighborhood's sharp-eyed widow, pushing a stroller with her grandson inside. Her hair had gone grayer since Emma last saw her, but her tone was exactly the same, half warm, half nosy. Emma forced a smile. "Evening, Mrs. Landers. Yeah, I'm home a little earlier than expected." "Well, I'll be," the woman said, stopping at the curb. "I thought you were still deployed. Your folks didn't mention you were back." "They didn't know," Emma admitted. "I wanted to surprise them." Mrs. Landers hesitated, then her expression shifted into something more cautious. "Oh, honey, they're not here. Left a few days ago for a family trip. Greece, I think. Some big vacation." Emma blinked, the words hitting harder than she expected. "Greece," she repeated, her voice flat. "They didn't tell me anything about that." The older woman's lips pressed together as if she wished she hadn't said anything. "I assumed you were with them. And, Emma," she lowered her voice, glancing toward the stroller as if afraid little ears might overhear. "Your grandfather, Henry, he's in the hospital. Ambulance came nearly 2 weeks ago. It's serious. Heart failure, maybe more." The world seemed to tilt for a moment. Emma gripped the strap of her duffel bag tighter, her jaw clenching. 2 weeks. Her family had boarded a plane to paradise while her grandfather lay in a hospital bed, fighting for his life. And no one had thought to tell her. Emma stood frozen on the sidewalk, Mrs. Landers' words echoing in her head. 2 weeks. Her grandfather had been lying in a hospital bed for 14 days, and no one, not her mother, not her sister, not even her stepfather, had bothered to send her a single message. She forced herself to thank the neighbor and turned away before her voice cracked. The weight of betrayal pressed against her chest as she pulled her phone from her coat pocket. The signal was weak, but she tried calling her mother first. Straight to voicemail. She tried again, nothing. Next was her younger sister, Chloe. The phone rang twice before disconnecting. Seconds later, a notification popped up. Chloe had posted a new story on social media. Emma opened it, her pulse quickening. The image filled her screen, Chloe on a sunny beach, holding a cocktail decorated with a flower. The caption read, "Finally getting what I deserve. #vacation vibes." Emma nearly hurled the phone into the nearest hedge. Her hands shook with fury as she imagined her family sipping drinks by the sea while Henry Carter, the man who had practically raised her, lay fighting for every breath. She had been sending money home for years, believing it was going toward his medication, his care, his comfort. And yet, when the moment came to show up, they vanished. As the taxi pulled up again to the curb, Emma waved it down with a hard, decisive motion. "County General Hospital," she said through clenched teeth. The driver nodded, but Emma barely noticed. She was staring out the window, anger boiling beneath her skin. This wasn't just neglect. It was abandonment. And she was determined to uncover just how deep the betrayal ran. The sterile smell of disinfectant clung to the air as Emma stepped into County General. The waiting room was crowded with tired faces, people slumped in their chairs as if grief had drained the strength from their bones. Emma approached the front desk, her military boots heavy against the linoleum floor. "I'm looking for Henry Carter," she said firmly, though her voice wavered just slightly. "Admitted about 2 weeks ago." The nurse typed a few notes, her brow furrowing. "He's in the ICU, room 614. Are you family?" "I'm his granddaughter." The nurse hesitated, her eyes softening. "You're the first visitor he's had since admission." Emma's chest tightened. She swallowed hard, nodded, and took the visitor pass without another word. The elevator ride felt endless, the fluorescent lights humming above her as if mocking the silence between her and the people who should have been here before her. When the doors slid open, Emma walked the sterile hallway, past curtained rooms and beeping monitors, until she reached 614. Inside, the dim glow of machines cast pale light over the bed. Henry looked impossibly small, shrunken against the white sheets. Tubes snaked from his mouth and arms, machines hummed steadily, and the rhythmic pulse of a monitor filled the room with its mechanical reminder that he was still alive, barely. Emma stepped closer, her throat tight. The man who had once carried lumber across his shoulders, who had taught her to ride a bike, who had laughed loudly at his own corny jokes, was now reduced to wires, machines, and the rise and fall of a chest powered more by technology than will. She pulled a chair up beside him and reached for his hand, rough and bruised from 4 needles. "It's me, Grandpa," she whispered. "I'm here now." The only reply was the steady, indifferent beep of the monitor. But Emma knew, in that moment, that Henry Carter would not be left alone again. Not while she was here. Emma sat in the stiff hospital chair, her hand still wrapped gently around Henry's. The machines filled the silence, beeping steadily like a cruel metronome. She couldn't take her eyes off his frail frame, his chest rising and falling in rhythm with the ventilator. Her mind drifted back to the countless calls she had made while overseas, late nights from desert outposts, early mornings from bases where the sun never seemed to rise gently. Every time, her family had updates, but never the ones that mattered. Her mother, Linda, had always been quick with requests. "Sweetheart, the roof is leaking again, can you send a little extra?" Or "Your sister's tuition came up short, just this once." And always, "Your grandfather's prescriptions are expensive, but we'll manage if you can help." Emma had wired the money without hesitation, clinging to the belief that she was helping keep Henry safe and comfortable. He deserved that much. He had been her anchor when the rest of the family drifted. But sitting here now, watching him alone in this sterile room, the truth gnawed at her. The money hadn't gone where they said it had. Her sister Chloe's vacation photos, the designer sunglasses her mother flaunted in recent posts, even the way her stepfather Robert always seemed to have a new gadget, suddenly it all made sense. They hadn't just been careless, they had used her. She had been nothing more than an ATM in uniform. Emma clenched her jaw, anger burning hot beneath her ribs. She had faced enemies in combat zones, but betrayal from family cut deeper than any battlefield wound. She looked back at Henry's pale face, the man who had raised her when no one else bothered. "They don't get to win anymore," she whispered, her voice low but resolute. "Not at your expense." For the first time since stepping off the plane, Emma felt a shift inside her, not just grief, but purpose. Emma sat in the hospital's bleak cafeteria, a paper cup of bitter coffee cooling in her hands. Her phone lay on the table, screen dark, as though mocking her with its silence. She had called and texted her mother and Chloe 6 times, and still, nothing. Finally, she pressed video call. The phone rang far longer than she expected before the screen flickered to life. Her mother appeared first, oversized sunglasses hiding most of her face. A wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over her tanned skin, and behind her stretched the glittering blue of the Mediterranean. A cocktail with a tiny umbrella balanced in her hand. "Emma," Linda chirped, her voice unnervingly cheerful. "Look at you, back already. We thought you had a few more months." Emma didn't smile. "Where are you?" Linda laughed, like the question was absurd. "Greece, honey. I told you, remember?" "No," Emma said flatly. "You didn't." There was a beat of silence before her mother waved it off. "Oh, well, I'm sure it just slipped your mind. Deployment takes a toll, you know? People forget things." Emma leaned closer to the camera. "Grandpa's in the ICU. Has been for 2 weeks. Alone. The forced smile on Linda's face faltered, but only for a second. Oh, is he? That's surprising. He seemed fine when we left. You know how he is, always dramatic about his aches and pains. We needed this trip. Emma's stomach twisted. We needed this trip. That was the excuse. A second face popped into view, Chloe, her younger sister, 23, and carefree, hair tousled from the beach. She wore a bikini top and rolled her eyes as if Emma had just interrupted a joke. Hey, sis. You're back. Don't be so dramatic. Mom's right. Grandpa always bounces back. You sound just like him, worrying over nothing. Emma's voice was like ice. I'm the only one sitting beside him right now while you sip cocktails. Chloe smirked. You always take everything so seriously. Relax, Emma. He'll be fine. Emma stared at the screen, at their glossy smiles and golden tans, and felt something harden inside her. They weren't just negligent, they were shameless. Emma ended the call with a sharp tap of her finger, the screen going black before her mother could argue further. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from rage so sharp it felt like glass under her skin. She opened her banking app, scrolling through the recent transactions. Her stomach knotted as the truth unfolded in plain numbers. Flights to Athens. Hotel charges in Santorini. Jewelry purchases, spa services, dinners at expensive restaurants. Thousands gone. All siphoned from the account she had set aside for Henry's care. Not a single hospital bill. Not a single pharmacy charge. Her chest ached with betrayal, but she refused to let grief paralyze her. She had spent too long trusting them, too long believing their lies. Her thumb hovered over the option in the app, freeze accounts. For a moment, she hesitated, hearing echoes of her mother's voice in her mind. Sweetheart, you're overreacting. Families forgive. Families share. But then she looked up at the hospital hallway through the cafeteria window, where her grandfather lay tethered to machines, utterly abandoned. Her jaw tightened. Enough. She pressed confirm. A notification popped up. Access restricted. All cards disabled. Emma exhaled slowly, a wave of grim satisfaction washing over her. She could already imagine her mother and Chloe in their resort suite, realizing their credit cards had been declined. For once, their selfishness had a consequence. But this wasn't about revenge, it was about survival. From now on, Henry's bills would come first. His medications, his hospital care, his dignity. Emma slipped her phone back into her pocket and rose from the cafeteria table. She wasn't just Henry's granddaughter anymore. She was his protector. And she was done being her family's ATM. That night, after the nurses had finished their rounds, Emma sat in the dim light of Henry's ICU room, listening to the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. She wanted to do something, anything, besides just sit and watch him sleep. Her eyes drifted toward the small nightstand tucked against the wall, half hidden beneath hospital papers and a plastic water pitcher. On impulse, she opened the top drawer. Inside lay a cheap comb, a packet of tissues, and a crumpled pharmacy receipt. She almost closed it again, until she noticed something at the very bottom, pressed flat against the wood. A manila envelope, its corners worn and edges smudged from handling. Her breath caught when she saw the shaky handwriting across the front, "For Emma." With careful fingers, she slid it out and unfolded the flap. Inside were several official-looking documents, stamped and notarized. Her eyes scanned the headers: durable power of attorney, healthcare proxy, both naming Emma Carter as the sole agent, signed just weeks before her grandfather's hospitalization. Her pulse quickened as she turned the pages. Her mother's name wasn't listed. Neither was Chloe's. Not even Robert's. Only hers. Emma leaned back in the chair, the weight of it sinking in. Henry hadn't trusted them. He had known, even before she did, that they would fail him. That when it came to his care, only Emma could be counted on. For a moment, guilt stabbed through her, guilt for not being here sooner, for not seeing it earlier. But the guilt quickly hardened into something else. Resolve. She carefully folded the papers back into the envelope and tucked it into her bag. When she looked at Henry again, pale and still beneath the machines, she whispered, "Don't worry, Grandpa. I've got you. They'll never touch you again. The monitor beeped steadily in the silence, as if agreeing. The following morning, Emma tucked the envelope carefully into her shoulder bag and drove across town to a modest office building sandwiched between a laundromat and a diner. A faded sign above the door read, "Turner and Carver, Attorneys at Law." Inside, the air smelled faintly of old paper and burnt coffee. A receptionist with kind eyes looked up from her desk. Emma introduced herself, explaining she had documents from Henry Carter. The receptionist's expression shifted instantly, recognition, and something almost like relief. "Mr. Carver has been expecting you," she said softly. Emma's brow furrowed. "Expecting me?" The receptionist simply nodded and led her down a narrow hallway to a corner office. Behind a cluttered desk sat an older man in a rumpled suit, his tie crooked, his glasses sliding down his nose. Yet when he stood to shake her hand, his grip was firm, his presence steady. "Miss Carter," he greeted, motioning for her to sit. "I wondered when you'd find your way here." Emma set the envelope on his desk. "You knew about this?" He opened the papers with practiced ease, scanning the signatures before nodding. "Yes. Your grandfather came to me 3 months ago. He was worried. Said he trusted you more than anyone else in his family. He insisted on putting everything, financial, medical, legal, into your hands." Emma swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Why didn't he tell me?" Carver leaned back, studying her carefully. "Because he knew you'd try to fix it from afar. He didn't want you distracted while deployed. He said when the time came, you'd act without hesitation. He was right." Emma's jaw clenched. Relief mixed with fury, a storm swirling inside her. Her grandfather had seen the truth long before she dared admit it. He had prepared for this. For her. Carver folded the papers neatly and handed them back. "From this moment on, Miss Carter, the law is on your side. You are the sole authority. Whatever decisions need to be made, medical or financial, they're yours." Emma gripped the envelope tightly, the weight of responsibility heavy but welcome. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of clarity. "Good," she said firmly. "Because it's time to make things right." Emma left Carver's office with a folder pressed against her chest, the weight of it heavier than any rucksack she had carried in the service. Inside were the notarized papers, proof of her authority, and more importantly, her grandfather's trust. By the time she returned to County General, her decision was already made. She marched straight to the ICU front desk and handed the documents to the head nurse. The woman flipped through the pages, her professional composure softening into something warmer. "Miss Carter," she said with a nod, "from this moment forward, you are the only point of contact for Mr. Henry Carter's care. All updates, all permissions, all decisions, through you and you alone." Emma exhaled, a subtle release of tension she hadn't realized she was holding. Good. That's exactly how it should be. She spent the next hour meeting with billing and administration. Every outstanding invoice was redirected to her. Every future charge would bypass her mother's address and land directly in her inbox. The hospital staff assured her that no one else, Linda, Robert, Chloe, would have access. When she walked back into Henry's room, the steady beeping of the monitors felt different, almost steadier. She sat beside him, sliding the folder onto the nightstand like a silent vow. "It's official now, Grandpa," she whispered, taking his hand. "They can't touch you. They can't touch a dime. It's just us." Her phone buzzed violently in her pocket. A string of missed calls from Greece, her mother, her sister, even Robert. No voicemails, of course. They never left evidence. Emma muted the phone, set it face down, and leaned closer to Henry. "They'll scream," she said softly. "They'll call me selfish, cruel, ungrateful. But we know the truth, don't we? You trusted me. And I won't let you down." The machines hummed in agreement, and for the first time since she came home, Emma felt a flicker of peace. She was no longer waiting for someone else to do the right thing. She was in command now, and she wasn't letting go. Emma sat in the small hospital family lounge, her laptop open on the table, the folder of legal documents at her side. She had scheduled the video call for noon, her time. It would be late evening in Greece, The perfect moment to interrupt their cocktails and sunsets. At exactly 11:59, she clicked the meeting link. Her mother appeared first, her hair loose, drink in hand, the glow of a luxury resort patio behind her. "Sweetheart," Linda began in that syrupy voice she always used when she wanted to soften her lies. "We really should have planned this talk sooner." Emma cut her off. "You're all here to listen, not talk." A moment later, Chloe joined, still in a swimsuit, rolling her eyes as if the whole thing was an inconvenience. Finally, Robert Square popped up, sunburnt, shirtless, holding a coconut drink like he was mocking her on purpose. "Can we make this quick?" Chloe muttered. "The Wi-Fi is trash here." Emma leaned forward, her voice cold and steady. "Here's the quick version. You're all cut off. Financially. Legally. Permanently." Linda blinked, caught off guard. "Cut off from what, exactly?" "Everything," Emma said. She held up the signed power of attorney to the camera. "Grandpa gave me full control, medical, financial, and legal. I've filed the documents. The hospital, the bank, the estate, it's all under me now. You have no access." Chloe laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "That's fake. You're bluffing." Emma flipped to the page with the notary seal and pressed it close to the webcam. "Here's the bluff." Robert scoffed. "You've gone off the deep end." Linda tried her calm, manipulative tone again. "Emma, honey, this is extreme. We were going to involve you." "No," Emma snapped. "You weren't. You lied. You left him. You stole from my account. And the only time you reached out was when the money stopped flowing." The three faces on the screen shifted, anger, annoyance, guilt, but none dared to deny it outright. "I'll make this clear," Emma continued. "The hospital contacts me and only me. Every bill goes through me. The estate is frozen until I say otherwise. And if any of you try to interfere, I'll file restraining orders so fast your sunscreen won't dry. You can't just erase us." Chloe shouted. Emma gave a small, cold smile. "Watch me." Then, without waiting for a response, she ended the call. The quiet that followed was not relief, not triumph, it was control. For the first time in years, Emma felt the balance shift. The power was no longer theirs to abuse. It was hers to protect. That night, Emma spread papers across her grandfather's kitchen table, the same table where Henry once taught her multiplication with pennies and nickels. Now it was her battlefield, and every receipt, every bank statement, every voicemail transcript was a weapon. She began with the bank records. Her eyes darted down the columns, charges at jewelry stores, resorts, boutique shops. Then, in smaller print, medication reimbursement or grandpa's expenses. But the pharmacy receipts she had collected told a different story. Henry had already paid in cash. Her mother had been double-dipping, inventing charges and siphoning off the money Emma sent. Emma built a spreadsheet, her military-trained precision kicking in. One column for the actual expense, one for the false reimbursement, and one for proof of duplication. Each row painted a picture of fraud, negligence, and greed. She color-coded them in red, labeling the file simply, Evidence, Carter Family Abuse. Then she moved on to voicemail transcripts. Most were junk calls, but a few made her stomach twist. Chloe's voice. "Hey, can you send like $100 for that knee thing? Mom said you had it covered, but I need it for yoga this week." Emma saved the file, labeling it Evidence, Chloe Misuse. Another message from Robert. "Leon, I'm not your chauffeur. If you need to get to the doctor, take an Uber. We're not your caretakers." Emma replayed it twice, her anger sharpening with each word. He had said it outright, they weren't caretakers. Yet they cashed the support checks as if they were. By dawn, Emma had over 60 files neatly organized, backed up in multiple drives, even printed and sealed in an envelope labeled, "In case they fight back." Because she knew they would. Her family wouldn't retreat quietly, they would lie, gaslight, spin their story until the truth was unrecognizable. But Emma was ready. She had the evidence. And when the time came, she would put it in front of a judge and watch the lies crumble under the weight of undeniable proof. She leaned back, exhausted, staring at the mountain of documents. Her grandfather had trusted her with everything, and she wasn't going to let him down. Not now. Not ever. The courthouse smelled of lemon polish and old paper, the kind of place where truth was supposed to outlast lies. Emma sat at the petitioner's table, her blazer crisp, her folders stacked neatly before her. Each tab was color-coded, each page labeled, every weapon sharpened for this battle. Across the aisle, her mother sat stiffly in pearls, Chloe slouched with her phone half hidden in her lap, and Robert wore a wrinkled jacket that looked borrowed, his expression already bored. Behind them, 3 different lawyers shuffled notes, whispering strategies that Emma suspected wouldn't save them. When the judge entered, everyone rose. He was silver-haired, deliberate in his movements, and carried the kind of no-nonsense presence that made excuses wilt before they were spoken. Carver, seated beside Emma, rose first. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here on behalf of Miss Emma Carter, who holds durable power of attorney and medical proxy for her grandfather, Henry Carter. We petition to revoke the rights of the respondents, Linda Carter, Robert Carter, and Chloe Carter, citing neglect, financial abuse, and breach of fiduciary trust." The judge peered over his glasses. "That's a heavy charge. You're telling me the entire family failed to care for this man?" "Not just failed," Carver replied smoothly, handing up the first evidence packet. "They exploited him. And we can prove it." For the next hour, Emma's carefully built case unfolded piece by piece. Duplicate reimbursements. Bank transfers marked Grandpa's meds that were spent on jewelry and flights. Voicemails where Robert refused to drive Henry to appointments. Social media posts of cocktails on Greek beaches dated the same week the hospital left messages about Henry's collapse. When the judge asked if she had anything to add, Emma stood. Her voice did not waver. "My grandfather raised me when no one else would. He gave me everything he had. And while he lay in a hospital bed fighting for his life, these 3 were drinking on a beach. I am not here for revenge, Your Honor. I am here for accountability. They don't deserve to control 1 cent of what he built." Silence filled the courtroom. Even Chloe lowered her phone. Finally, the judge leaned back in his chair. "You've done your due diligence, Miss Carter. Rarely do we see a case this well documented." He turned his gaze toward the respondents, his voice cold and firm. "Effective immediately, I am freezing all estate accounts under Mr. Henry Carter's name. Full legal and financial authority rests solely with Miss Emma Carter. Furthermore, I recommend a full audit to determine if criminal charges are warranted. The respondents are barred from contacting hospital staff, accessing joint accounts, or representing themselves as next of kin." The gavel struck once, sharp as a gunshot. "That will be all." Emma didn't smile, didn't flinch. She gathered her files and walked past her family without a glance. For the first time in her life, the law was on her side, and their power over Henry was gone. The days after court moved in a strange kind of stillness. Outside, the world continued with its traffic, its chatter, its ordinary chaos. But inside Henry's ICU room, time seemed suspended, measured only by the rise and fall of his chest and the steady beep of the heart monitor. Emma rarely left his side. Each morning she arrived with coffee for the nurses and a fresh pair of socks for her grandfather, knowing he'd have hated looking unkempt. She brushed his hair with the cheap plastic comb from the nightstand, played his favorite old country songs on a tiny Bluetooth speaker, and read aloud from the newspaper, even when his eyes remained closed. She told him about the weather, about the courtroom victory, about how the hospital now called her for every decision. "See, Grandpa," she whispered once, squeezing his frail hand. "They can't touch you anymore. It's just us now." But outside that quiet sanctuary, her phone was a storm. Bitter emails from Linda flooded her inbox, pleading one moment, accusing the next. Chloe's messages were sharp and petulant. "You ruined everything. Grandpa wouldn't want this." Robert, predictably, sent only one, "You're dead to me." Emma muted the notifications. They no longer mattered. Their threats were just noise, powerless against the stack of legal documents resting in her bag and the truth she carried in her chest. Every night, she unfolded the thin cot the nurses had slipped her, sleeping lightly in the chair beside Henry's bed. Sometimes she woke to the sound of his breathing faltering, her heart lurching until the machine steadied again. Each scare reminded her of what she already knew. Time was slipping through her fingers. Still, she refused to let him face it alone. He had carried her through her childhood when no one else did. Now it was her turn to carry him through the end. It happened on a night like any other. The hospital was hushed, fluorescent lights humming in the hallways, the faint shuffle of nurses' shoes echoing from afar. Emma sat in her usual spot beside Henry's bed, his hand cradled gently in hers. She had been telling him a story from her first deployment, about how her boots once melted onto a scorching runway and she had laughed instead of cried, just to keep her spirit intact. Her voice was soft, steady, though her eyes stung with unshed tears. "You'd have scolded me for not taking care of my gear, Grandpa," she whispered with a faint smile. "But you'd have laughed too." Henry's breathing had grown shallower over the past days, each inhale a fragile effort. That night, it shifted again, slower, quieter, as if the machines were carrying more of the burden than he was. Emma leaned closer, squeezing his hand a little tighter. "I'm here," she murmured. "I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone." There was no dramatic alarm, no sudden panic. Just a long, soft exhale, followed by stillness. The heart monitor traced one last flat line of quiet finality. Emma stayed frozen, her hand still clasped around his. She didn't cry at first. Grief arrived in silence, heavy and immovable. But beneath it was something else, something steadier: pride. Her grandfather had not died abandoned, left to fade in a sterile room without a soul who cared. He had left this world with her by his side, with dignity and love. When the nurse entered, she rested a hand on Emma's shoulder. "He went peacefully," she said softly. Emma nodded, brushing a trembling hand across her face. "He wasn't alone. That's what matters." She adjusted Henry's blanket, smoothed the collar of his hospital gown, and pressed her forehead briefly against his hand. Then she whispered the words she hadn't said nearly enough in life. "Thank you. For everything." The morning of the funeral dawned grey, as though the sky itself understood what the day carried. Emma stood at the small chapel door in her pressed dress blues, the uniform Henry had always admired. Her polished shoes clicked against the stone floor as she greeted the people who mattered. Henry's Navy buddy from Tampa, stooped and frail but determined to pay his respects. The mailman who used to share coffee with Henry every Friday, Mrs. Landers, who arrived clutching a tray of lemon bars and wept like she was losing her own father. It wasn't a large crowd. No long lines, no elaborate floral displays, no grand gestures. Just neighbors, friends, and a handful of people whose lives Henry had touched with kindness too simple to be forgotten. They spoke in quiet tones, sharing memories. How he'd fixed a fence without being asked, how he told jokes even when his back ached, how he always had time to listen. On the front pew sat a small bouquet of white lilies, Emma's tribute. Beside it, the funeral director had placed several larger arrangements sent under the names of Linda, Robert, and Chloe. Their ribbons were gaudy, the flowers cheap and impersonal, the kind of gestures made for appearances rather than love. Emma stared at them for a long moment, her jaw tight. Then, after the service, she instructed the director to donate the arrangements to the hospice wing down the street. "Someone there could use them," she said simply. "They don't belong here." When she stood to deliver her eulogy, her voice was steady though her hands trembled slightly at the podium. Henry Carter was the man who never raised his voice, but everyone listened to anyway. "He taught me what loyalty looks like. He gave me a home when no one else cared to. If dignity can be earned, he earned it 100 times over. But the truth is, he did not die peacefully. He died neglected. And that's something I'll carry, not as guilt, but as fuel to make sure his story matters." The chapel was silent, save for the muffled sobs of Mrs. Landers. When Emma stepped away from the casket one last time, she pressed her fingertips gently against the polished wood, her silent promise etched in the gesture: he will never be forgotten. Weeks after the funeral, the house felt emptier than ever. Emma walked through Henry's workshop, the smell of sawdust still lingering, his tools neatly hung in the same order he had kept them for decades. She ran her hand along the scarred wooden workbench and paused, her heart heavy but her mind clear. Henry's legacy couldn't end with silence, it had to mean something. With Carver's guidance, Emma began the long process of restructuring her grandfather's modest estate. The accounts once siphoned by her mother were redirected into something new, the Henry Carter Foundation for Veterans and Forgotten Seniors. Its mission was simple but powerful, providing care, financial assistance, and companionship for veterans and elderly men and women abandoned by the very families who should have loved them most. Emma poured herself into the work. She used her military network to connect with veteran outreach programs. She partnered with local hospitals and hospice centers. The first initiative funded transport services for elderly patients who had no one to drive them to appointments. The second supplied stipends for veterans whose pensions barely covered medication. The foundation's small office was nothing more than a converted back room in the Carter home, but its reach spread quickly. Volunteers came forward, neighbors, fellow soldiers, even strangers who had read Henry's story in the local paper. Donations trickled in, then flowed, from people who believed in the cause. Late one night, as Emma filed away paperwork, she paused to look at a framed photo of Henry in his Navy uniform. His smile was wide, his posture proud. She whispered, "You always took care of others. Now I'll make sure that never stops." For the first time since his passing, the grief in her chest shifted. It wasn't lighter, it never would be, but it carried a new shape. Purpose. Within months, the Carter Foundation's small mailbox overflowed daily. At first, Emma assumed it was more invoices, donation receipts, or outreach requests. But when she began opening the envelopes, she realized they were something else entirely: stories. One letter came from a woman in Kansas whose father, a Korean War veteran, had died alone in a nursing home, his children too busy arguing over his estate to visit. Another came from a man in Ohio who admitted he hadn't spoken to his mother in years, only to learn too late that she had passed without family by her side. Some letters were angry, some heartbreaking, and some read like confessions written to a stranger who might understand. Emma read each one carefully, often late into the night at her kitchen table, a stack of envelopes on one side and a growing binder of photocopies on the other. She highlighted common themes: abandonment, financial exploitation, the quiet suffering of seniors treated as burdens rather than human beings. Emails followed. Phone calls. Even handwritten notes tucked into donation envelopes, telling stories in shaky cursive that carried decades of silence. One night, as she set another letter down, Emma felt the truth settle in her bones. This wasn't just about Henry. It wasn't just about her family's betrayal. It was about something much larger, a pattern, a wound in society too big for one person to heal alone. She stood and looked at the wall above her desk, where she had pinned photos of Henry alongside a growing collage of faces sent in by strangers. Veterans in uniforms, elderly women with soft smiles, men leaning on canes, all of them framed by the same quiet dignity her grandfather had carried. "This is bigger than us, Grandpa," she whispered. "Bigger than I ever imagined. But I'll keep going. For them. For all of them." And with that, Emma understood. The Carter Foundation was no longer just a tribute. It was a movement. Spring warmed the air when the memorial bench was finally delivered. Emma supervised as two workers set it beneath the great oak tree at the center of Willow Creek Park, the same tree where Henry used to sit on summer afternoons, whittling wood while she played nearby as a child. The bench was simple, sturdy, made of dark oak with iron armrests. What made it extraordinary was the engraving etched into the backrest in bold, clean letters. "For the ones who show up." Emma ran her fingertips across the words, her throat tightening. Those 6 words carried everything her grandfather had lived by. He had always shown up, when her parents didn't, when she was sick, when life felt heavier than she could carry. And at the end, she had done the same for him. The installation drew a small crowd. Neighbors, foundation volunteers, and a handful of veterans stood quietly as Emma placed a bouquet of fresh lilies on the seat. Mrs. Landers dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, whispering, "He'd be so proud." Emma smiled faintly, blinking back her own tears. "This isn't just for him," she said softly to the group. "It's for anyone who's ever felt forgotten. For anyone who's carried the weight of being alone. This bench will always be here, for them, for us, for the ones who refuse to walk away." As the sun dipped lower, the shadows of the oak stretched across the grass, and Emma sat down on the bench for the first time. She closed her eyes, listening to the rustling leaves above her, imagining Henry's voice, steady, warm, full of quiet pride. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel quite so alone. Weeks turned into months, and the storm of her family's fury slowly faded into static. Bitter emails stopped coming. Calls went unanswered. Their threats, once sharp and frequent, dulled into silence when it became clear Emma would not bend. The court's ruling had sealed the matter, and there was nothing left for them to take. But Emma no longer wasted energy on their shadows. Instead, her days filled with hospital visits to veterans who had no relatives, meetings with volunteers, and handwritten thank you notes from seniors whose lives the Carter Foundation had touched. Every smile, every small victory stitched something inside her back together. One evening, she returned to the park where Henry's bench sat beneath the old oak tree. A stranger was already there, a weary man in his 70s, cap pulled low, a walking cane resting against the wood. He looked up as Emma approached, his eyes damp but grateful. "This seat," he said quietly, tapping the engraving with his finger. "It means more than you know." Emma simply nodded, her throat too tight to answer. She sat beside him for a while in companionable silence, the oak leaves whispering overhead. In that moment, she understood. Henry's legacy wasn't just hers to carry. It belonged to anyone who needed it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma breathed in deeply, letting the peace of the evening settle over her. Her family had abandoned Henry, but in doing so, they had revealed the truth, that loyalty had nothing to do with bloodlines. It was measured in presence, in care, in the simple act of showing up when it mattered most. For Emma Carter, that was justice enough. Quiet justice, but the kind that would outlast betrayal.